trailing in behind, but I think we're going to go ahead and get started with our discussion today. I first of all want to thank you guys all for being here. I know it's a crazy time and really happy that you devoted some of your day to being able to listen to us and talk to us. I want to introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kennedy. I am from Los Angeles, California, and my family is from the Caribbean. I joined Expat my sophomore year at USC, and I'm currently a rising senior, and I'm a communications major. We have an incredible panel of extremely intelligent people, and I would love for them to introduce themselves. We're going to start with Abir, then go to Toby, Chris, and then Jacob. Go, guys, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Abir. I am a rising senior at USC, and I study global health, and I have a minor in social entrepreneurship. On campus, I'm involved in Lava Lab, Expat, and the Student Advisory Council for the Institute of Inequalities in Global Health. And I joined Expat the fall of my junior year, so relatively recently. I was born in Nigeria and lived there for a few years, and then I grew up in the United States.
Hi, everybody. My name is Toby. I am British Nigerian, so I live between London and Nigeria, but my family is originally from Nigeria. I'm a recent graduate at USC. I majored in psychology and my minor was in culture, media, and entertainment. My USC resume certainly isn't as exciting as Avir's, but I am a member of Expat and I'm a member of Kappa Kappa Gamma sorority.
Hello, my name is Chris Boyd. I'm a recent graduate of USC, studied health communications. Studied health human science with a minor in health communications, excuse me. I joined Expat my junior year, I believe, but I am nowhere near exciting as like these two because I just stayed in books all day at USC because I'm planning on going to grad school, so yeah.
Hi everybody, my name is Jakob. I am born and raised in Stockholm, Sweden, and then came to the US for university. On campus, I'm involved with Expat, obviously, but then also the Fashion Industry Association. I joined Expat fall semester of senior year. So technically I just graduated, but I am staying another semester at SC.
So now that everyone has introduced themselves, before we begin with the incredibly thoughtful questions that you guys sent us, I just want to list a couple of disclaimers just so we're all on the same page. We all, as the panelists, promise to answer all of these questions as honestly and with as much compassion as we can. But we are only a few people in a large movement, so we can't say that our personal experiences speak for everyone, just to keep that in mind. And then another really important disclaimer that we want to say is that even though we're very grateful that all of you guys tuned in today, we want to make sure that we take this conversation and take it outside of Zoom. Even though this is an incredible space to listen and learn, we think it's really important that you all continue on your educational journey about this movement way beyond this panel. So with that, we're going to get started. We had so many questions that you guys asked, and we were very thankful for that. We were only able to choose a few, but I did my best to condense them and just see what sort of topics you guys were interested in learning about. So we're going to start with the first question. There is a common misconception that if you don't display qualities of an overt racist, you are exempt from displaying racist behavior in general. What are the ways in which racism exists on a spectrum, and how common is it for a liberal-minded individual to be a perpetrator of microaggressions? So we're gonna go into defining microaggressions a little bit, and I'm gonna pass it over to Chris. Chris, if you'd like to start.
Yes, so like, from my understanding, just personal understanding and years of just reviewing the term microaggression, it's just daily terms that are used that project in a overt way or like inadvertently, it's just a negative message or a hostile or derogatory message to a user. And you don't have to be racist. That's the common misconception. Like you don't have to be racist to use microaggressions or micro insults on a daily basis. And it's things that aren't even directed at Black people in general. It's of anyone who is considered a minority, whether you're disabled, whether you are gay, whether you are a woman. In the US, since being Christian is the majority, if you're not Christian, you could throw microaggressions. And it's just from those in a major class, it's thrown from those in a major class to minorities. So an example of this, things that I've received multiple times at USC is just like, oh, you should meet my friend because she's Black, or you should meet this girl because she's Black, or like, Chris, you're so articulate. I've gotten that told by teachers. And while it's like a backhanded compliment, you know, like, because while they are giving you a compliment, and while, like, you know, they're trying to say like, oh, you'll like this person because they're Black. Oh, you'll like this girl because she's Black. Oh, you are a very articulate young man. On the other hand, on the other side, it's just sort of like, are you only saying that because I'm a Black male, or like things of that nature? And like I said, like, microaggressions could be told to anybody, no matter what your class, race, religion, etc. But it's mainly just sort of a backhanded insult in common day-to-day dialogue.
And to hop off on that, in terms of racism existing on a spectrum, I think a lot of the times there's just a super heavy negative connotation placed on the word racism, which makes sense because it's inherently thinking that, you know, you're better than someone for whatever reason. But I think a lot of the times people's perception of racism is something very violent, something very extreme, such as like going out of your way to call someone the N-word, or like police brutality. But I think it's important to talk about microaggressions because it comes from our implicit biases. It comes from, you know, things that maybe our parents would say to us growing up that we just pass on, especially if you end up moving to the United States to go to school or something like that. And honestly, amongst people our age, it's way more common to receive microaggressions than to receive overt racism. So that's probably something that you should just keep in mind as you're interacting with people from any sort of marginalized group.
Yeah, the reason why microaggressions are so disconcerting is because they're so casual and so frequent, and they happen on such a huge scale that it's kind of a, if you blink, you'll miss it kind of thing. It's like, you really have to, it's like, when it comes across as a compliment, and then you think about it later and you're like, wow, that was really offensive. Like when people say stuff like, I've got a lot like, oh, you're pretty for a Black girl, like that's not a compliment, but it sounds like it's supposed to be a compliment. So they're just very disconcerting and very uncomfortable. And they're the kinds of things where if you don't really have someone to corroborate your feeling that it was racist, you probably won't even, you probably might think that like you're just insane.
And obviously, just to add on to that, it's also that, you know, obviously these stereotypes and associations that are formed, they really do affect your behaviors, even if you're not, you know, obviously conscious of it. They really do show. And something that I was thinking about a lot recently is that I do think that a lot of white people especially are kind of scared of being called out today in today's cancel culture for not being educated on the topic. And I do want to say that it's obviously not the responsibility of Blacks to educate non-Blacks on these microaggressions. And there really ought to be more of a conversation within the white community. Kind of really ask yourself what it means to be white, acknowledge the privilege that you have, and more so what you can do with that, how you can kind of leverage that privilege to help others. I was listening to this podcast recently with Baratunda Thorsten, who's a comedian and commentator, who kind of compared this white privilege to sort of a superpower, in the sense that there's no real use to be moping about having it, and it's much more productive to just kind of see what can I do with it. He kind of made an analogy of it being as if, you know, you don't see Superman moping around about his superpowers, but rather you know, making the best use of it to help others.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and it brings us really nicely into our next question, which is, what is white privilege, or what is non-Black privilege? And do you see this kinds of privilege being used amongst international students? Is it prevalent in expat society, and how do we mitigate it, if so?
So I feel like as long as you're a white person, you've got white privilege. It's not whether you're a white American or whether you're a white British person. So far as you're a white person, you're automatically born with that privilege. And the idea behind white privilege, and I feel like a reason why a lot of people have a problem with the word white privilege, is because a lot of people assume that the word privilege, they associate it with not having had any hardships in one's life. And that's definitely not true, because white privilege, you can be a white person and and have white privilege, but it just means that your hardships, sorry, you can be a white person and have undergone hardships, but it just means that your hardships aren't directly related to your skin color. So yeah, definitely.
Yeah, like, and on top of that, it's just like you specified white people, but like also just like white passing is also very important. Like one thing I did notice throughout my especially joining expat, a lot of, and like, not to discredit those people, but like I do have friends who I would vent to about, you know, my blackness and my, like, how I feel being a black male at times, but um they are like, you know, um white, they're just simply white passing in general, you know what I mean? So like if you walk down the street, the first thing that you think is that they are white women or white male, but like it's kind of hard to like for them to understand that like their experience, even though they don't share, like ethnically they're not that far away from me, physically what they, you don't see that, you know what I mean? Like, and that's something that I have to check a lot of my friends with, you know what I mean? Like whether they try to compare their Jewish experience with my blackness. I'm not trying to say I'm discrediting anyone at all, but it's not like you're wearing it fully over, like, unless you're like an Hasidic Jew. Like I see those all the time in New York, and I'm from New York. But like honestly, it's like I'm a black male and I wear that. I cannot scrub this off, you know what I mean? That's the one thing that people will see out of me when they first meet me. You feel me? But yeah.
Yeah, I think, well, obviously white privilege to me, obviously it's the fact that I've really never had to worry about really anything systemic. I had a conversation the other day and we kind of describe it as it's like being born with this wallet that's filled with gift cards and membership cards. And it's not like as if you earned it per se, but you still know that you can cash it in whenever. And another thing I think is really interesting in the university context is that when we apply for universities, we're typically viewed and we're categorized kind of like, you know, based on our national origin. But as soon as we actually show up at campus, it's kind of like we're placed into these more typical racial and ethnic boxes. And with that said, it wasn't really that much for me. And obviously I'm a white male, so I think that more than anything just highlights the issue. And it's not like I actively thought that, you know, things will go well for me because I'm white, but I did have, I guess, those subliminal expectations. And again, I can only speak for myself, but I would assume that a lot of other white students feel the same. And talking specifically more about expat, I feel like a lot of people are drawn to it because, you know, the organization celebrates diversity and it's really everything but homogenous. But that being said, I learned from conversations that we do, a lot of Black members don't feel as included. And, you know, obviously whether that's with music that's being played, the events that we're putting on, or the themes or activities. And I feel like obviously that's obviously really an issue. And really the first step here is to acknowledge, I think, the implicit racism and these biases that do exist. Obviously intent leads to dialogue, dialogue leads to action. But then again, it's not up to the Black members of expat to solve this. I think it's more so us non-Blacks that have to be observant and kind of check others for these types of biases, or just, you know, being aware of them, trying to acknowledge them.
Okay, so we've been talking about white privilege a lot. So everybody that's not white that like tuned out for a second, I'm speaking to you specifically. So there's still privilege if you're not Black in America. I'm going to give a bit of historical context in order to explain that better. So the F1 visa was created in 1952 in order to allow people to come to school and in the United States from different countries. But there was still a lot of racism from like past immigration acts that were passed in like 1924. And then the civil rights movement happened. And then in 1965, we have an increased influx of students from all around the world, because between 1952 to 65, the only people that were coming to study in the United States were people from like Canada or white European countries. And then this kind of opens it up to everyone else in the world. And like even if you face some sort of discrimination or microaggression based off of perhaps like being from Latin America or being from India, you've come to this country based off of education. You've come to this country because you were qualified enough to be able to enter, as opposed to, for Black Americans specifically, the reason why they were brought to this country was to be subjugated and was to build this country. So that's a very distinct difference. And I think that's really important because a lot of the times I think my non-Black friends that aren't white, that was so complicated, anyone who's not white and not Black, they tend to be like, I don't know why I should care about this, like people have like said XYZ towards me, and like, yeah, that's true, but you don't have a target on your back, and that target on your back doesn't extend to the rest of the world, which is a very unique experience that literally only Black people go through. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. Are we okay with answering this question, panel, or does anyone want to elaborate, or is it okay if we move on?
We could.
Okay, perfect. So taking that idea of this being a global issue and making sure that people understand that they definitely play a role in helping the Black Lives Matter movement, I wanted to pose the question is, how is the Black Lives Matter movement a global issue that does not just plague the US? I feel like the conversations I've been having recently with Abir and a lot of other people is people thinking that the US is this racist country, and even though that is entirely correct, we can't forget about the rest of the world, because even though it does pay a price to be Black in America, it does pay a price to be Black all over the world, and that also goes into colorism, that goes into colonialism. So I wanted to ask this question, Toby, I'm going to start with you. How can we make this an issue that people feel spreads around the world rather than just an issue that is taking place in the US?
Just from the news alone these days, we've seen so many marches all over the world, and this just goes to show that it's not just a US-centered problem. And I feel like a lot of people are a little confused as to why this is so widespread, because a lot of people are confusing the Black Lives Matter movement with just justice for George Floyd, and absolutely justice for George Floyd, but there are so many places all over the world where this is such a huge issue, and anti-Blackness is a huge issue. Just for a little bit of history, for example, people always assumed that America was one of those places that America was like the biggest slave colony in the world. That's incorrect. It was Portugal. Portugal had the most slaves in the world, and then a lot of these people moved on, went to Brazil. That is why Brazil has such a huge Yoruba, Abirana Yoruba, which is from Nigeria. Brazil has a huge Yoruba-speaking community because a lot of these people went over there, were taken over there as slaves. So, and then going back to the UK as well, like going back to Europe, the UK right now, there's a trending hashtag called the UK is not innocent, because a lot of people just assume that the UK racist stuff doesn't happen there as well as people marching for George Floyd there. They're marching for this woman called Belly Mujinga. And I don't know if you've heard about what happened, but to weaponize coronavirus in the UK is a criminal offense now. A man said he had coronavirus, spat at her, she got it, and then she died. His charges got dropped a few days ago. Whereas literally just 2-3 days ago, it happened to a police officer where someone claiming to have coronavirus spat at him, a white police officer, someone claiming to have coronavirus spat at him. The person is in jail for 2 years. So you see the differences there in the treatment of certain things. If we go to France, they're not just marching again for the Black Lives Matter movement and George Floyd. It extends further. They're marching for Adama Traore, who his last words were also, "I can't breathe." He was held down by French police and then he died in custody. In Italy, for example, that is one of the places where the sex trafficking of Black women, African women in particular, it has one of the biggest markets for human trafficking of African women for sex work. I can think of so many times when I've been to Italy with my family at the age of 12, 13, 14, and I've been solicited for sex by older men thinking that I'm a sex worker. Like, it's anti-Blackness around the globe is so rampant that is difficult to ignore. And I just feel like this movement, particularly in America, has elicited a lot of feelings in a lot of people, and they're realizing the faults in their own countries. Once again, going back to the UK, in terms of colonization, when we learn about, a lot of countries are reluctant to admit their racist past and reluctant to embrace their racist past. If we go to the UK, when they talk about colonization, they frame it as settlers, or they frame it as people coming into the country just to like be friends with the people that live there. When I learned about colonization at school, I was told by so many teachers that colonization was a good thing and that Africa was lucky to have been colonized, which is such a ridiculous statement to make. But these are the kinds of things that people say, and these are how they detract from their racist history. In Belgium, for example, King Leopold II killed 15 million Congolese people. That's twice the amount of people that were killed in the Holocaust, but you never hear about that because anti-Blackness is so rampant that we'd rather just push that to the side. In the UK, slavery ended in the UK in 1833. Slavery ended in the UK in 1833 up until 2015, which is just 5 years ago. There was 20 million pounds put aside to pay property taxes to descendants of slave owners. So descendants of old slave masters were still getting money for their lost property, which was slaves, up until 5 years ago, which is absolutely ridiculous. Police brutality, once again, is such a huge issue in the UK and all around the world. The only problem to do with Black people, the only problem is that in a lot of these places, they're not even allowed guns. So they can't kill Black people at the same rate that they're doing it in America. But in the UK, 2011, the London riots was triggered by the killing of an unarmed Black man. 3,000 people were arrested, 5 people were killed. So it's not just an America-centered issue. It's something that extends globally. And I feel like that's so important for people to understand that they have a part to play in the structural and systemic racism in a lot of their countries. And it's so, so, so important that, especially from this conversation, you take a lot of what we're saying and don't just think of it as an American-centered issue. And because we're expats, we're exempt from it. We are all part of this global issue. It's as much of a pandemic as coronavirus. That's it. What I think.
So to hop off of Toby, I'm going to bring language into this a little bit. I really love studying languages, and the ways in which we express ourselves really matter, right? And also the ways in which our languages express other people matter a lot. For instance, like negro is the word for Black in Spanish. Nobody in English says negro anymore. The etymology of that word hasn't changed after like however many thousand years. Spanish has been like circulating around. Like people just have not found it a priority, even though it's an extremely offensive term. If we want to talk about Arabic, like abid, people use that to describe Black people. That means slaves. Like I'm Muslim, I grew up around a lot of Arabic speaking Muslims, and that's what a lot of their parents use in order to describe Black people. And no one has thought to change the language. No one has thought to like bring that up in conversation and be like, maybe we should probably figure out a different word to use. In Hindi, like correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure the word khalo in order to describe Black people is also extremely offensive. So it's like, think about the language that you're taking back with you whenever you're going back home. Those are only a few examples that I could think of off of the top of my head. But the fact that you're still perpetuating all of this through your language really, really matters. You know, and even if you don't have like Black people immediately around you, there's dark-skinned people in your country. There's dark-skinned people who are also being oppressed and also being affected by systemic racism. Like it's not, oh my God, it's not exclusive to just Black people. Black people are definitely the most visible, and Black people definitely get the worst of the worst when it comes to derogatory terms. But I'm sure like every single language has a way to describe its darker skinned individuals. Every single country definitely 1000% has a system in place in order to make sure that there's no upward mobility for darker skinned individuals. Like I'm pretty sure, I could almost guarantee that everyone on this panel went to some sort of international school or some sort of school where it's like the people that you went to school around you weren't necessarily from like normal classes or classes in which there were darker skinned people, because it's a lot harder to have access to things that will actually help you to be able to move up in society and actually have a place with your peers because of long-standing either language or history that feeds into all of this.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Abir, and I feel like this also extends into the conversation of colorism within our respective races. I can tell you for a fact that, you know, I live in Nigeria, and lighter skinned people are held at way higher regard than darker skinned people. My mom is a lot lighter than me. She's got green eyes and blonde hair. She's very light. And people tell me all the time, oh, like you'd be way more attractive if you were, you know, as light as your mom, which like is such a ridiculous statement to make. And like, I just feel like it's something that we really need to pay attention to. I know that in India, they've got the class system in terms of like darker people being perceived as dirtier, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong. I know that in Nigeria, over 77% of women as of 2011 are bleaching their skin to make themselves lighter. So this really does extend into the conversation of colorism, but I feel like in that same respect, we shouldn't, and I feel like speaking on colorism as well and speaking on lighter skin as well, and particularly in America, mixed race people generally tend to have lighter skin. Don't think that because somebody is mixed race or because somebody is white passing, they're exempt from the Black Lives Matter movement, or they're exempt from being treated disproportionately because they're Black. In the 1900s in America, they had the one drop rule, which was so far as you've got at least one drop of Blackness or at least one drop of African ancestry in you, you're considered to be Black. Prior to that, that was preceded by Pater's Sequitur Ventrum, I think it's called, in like 1600s, which was essentially a rule where white slave owners could rape Black slaves and get them pregnant. But so far as the kid's mother was Black, they were not entitled to any of their property. And then that slowly developed into the one drop rule, which slowly developed into the reasons why mixed race people are definitely so central to the Black Lives Matter movement as well.
Touching on that point in terms of colorism, could we maybe take the conversation into something about cultural appropriation? It's a very widespread knowledge, common knowledge that when you take artifacts of Black culture and put them on people who are lighter skinned, it is considered to be more palatable, whether that be Black features, Black culture. How do you see Black culture being appropriated by your classmates, by people around the world in a way that's really not constructive? And is there a way for people to enjoy Black culture without appropriating it? Do you believe that cultural appropriation is a case-by-case basis by who gets offended by what? Could you touch on any experiences that you have with cultural appropriation and how people can go about enjoying culture without appropriating it?
For me, it started with like my first instance of like cultural appropriation with Black culture was back in high school when all my friends would go to the Caribbean, come back with braids thinking that it's all cool and stuff like that. And throughout like just many conversations that pertain to cultural appropriation, I know that it does vary from person to person on how to culture appropriate, but at least under my eyes, you need to know the history of something before you start adapting it for it to be your own. You know what I mean? And like, it goes from hip hop culture to simply putting braids in your hair to like just people having dreads and stuff like that. A lot of people simply, or even just taking garbs from different cultures, you know what I mean? Like a lot of people simply say, oh, it's a cool pattern, or I found it at like, while thrifting, and then putting it on and not knowing the history behind a piece or like the history between the threads, you know what I mean? And when they get approached by it, they get all defensive and they get all like, like, why are you doing this? I'm not racist, all this other stuff. And it doesn't, you just have to simply know, if you're going to try to adapt something that is not of your own culture, at least at the bare minimum, do your research on it. You know what I mean? So you at least know the culture, the meaning behind it. So it goes from tattoo culture to like hair culture, mainly for like a lot of Black women. I know like all my Black female friends stand strongly with that. To just like just outerwear, you know what I mean? Just do your research simply, in my opinion, before you start trying to adapt another culture. And if you don't know, then hey, you have Google on your iPhone. You know what I mean? Like where it's so easy, two clicks and you can find something. You know what I mean? But in my opinion, yeah, just know if you know for a fact that it's from somewhere else, just look it up. And
honestly, if you don't know, you can almost I would want to say like 98% guess that it came from Black people. So I'm gonna start with music once again. Okay, so in Colombia, there's a genre of music called merengue. There's a genre of music in Nigeria, oh my God, I don't know why I said it like that, called high life. Sounds exactly the same. Colombia, Africa, so far away. Reggaeton literally has the word reggae in it, from the Caribbean, islands full of Black people. EDM, created by a Black person. Country music, Black person. Jazz, Black person. Rock and roll, Black person. on and on and on and on. If we want to talk about beauty standards, the Kylie Jenners of the world, Black girls. Like, the thing is it's almost frustrating. It's like writing an essay in which you have to like cite your sources, and then you literally just forget about the MLA section, and you're just kind of like, here's my thing, like, this is what I did. And then you as a person, you as the person that you know that this is the culture that it comes from, you're just kind of like, I don't understand why someone would proudly taught this and not even understand where it's coming from. And the thing is like, part of it is the fact that historical erasure is so prominent when it comes to marginalized groups. So a lot of the times we don't know the origin of where something is coming from. But I literally could bet my life, 98% of whatever you think is cool, fashion, clothes, beauty, music, it specifically did come from Black people. And if you want to argue, we can, but it's like, it's a lost cause. That's all I have to say.
Amazing. That was an incredible answer. I agree with everything that you said. The next question that we are going to be discussing is, we got this question a lot actually, is a common misconception within American politics is that the election and the re-election of our first Black president, Barack Obama, was a step towards eradicating racism in America. Chris, I'm gonna ask you this question. Would you mind touching upon why the statement is false?
So you cannot simply eradicate racism in 8, like, yo, don't make me start with this. Like, you can't simply eradicate racism in a mere 8 years. Like, it was a start because a lot of people believed, it's like it was a false hope that President Barack Obama would, you know, it shows a lot of change. It shows, you know, just how forward thinking we are, how progressive we are. But at the end of the day, that man had to watch every step he did in office. You know what I mean? Not only because, and no, it was honestly only because he was the Black male, and he was half. So we're going to apply the 1-drop rule there. Like, yo, my man, like, the things that, I don't know, I'm sorry if any of you guys are Republican here, you have your beliefs, I don't care, but like, what Trump is doing now, Barack Obama would have never, ever been able to get away with when he was in office. And as a Black male, especially on like a lot smaller scale, because, you know, I'm no president, but it's just like, whenever I walk into a room at USC and like, it's all white classroom, like one of my public health classes, I was the only Black male there. Like, whenever I chose to talk, whenever I walked into that classroom, I had to sort of just know that, like, I had to watch my step, watch my arguing, watch everything like that. And that's, in my opinion, as a Black male, I think, and seeing how he had to deal with things, he did it phenomenally. Like, you know what I mean? And that is why he's the GOAT on social media and real life, him and his whole family. But it was no way like that it could ever eradicate racism, because this country was built on prejudice. You know what I mean? And like, it could have like opened up people's eyes to see what this man went through while he was in office, but everyone was trying to discredit everything that he did. From the moment he got in, they were saying he's not American, he shouldn't be in office, to like people saying he was Muslim and like stuff like that. You know what I mean? Even his children, his wife was ridiculed from like multiple occasions, because there's Michelle Obama was like, got loud under certain like instances while he was in office, and all fingers are pointing to her, saying you cannot talk this way, when she was just being an emotional Black woman under certain circumstances. So it was just things like that. And like, Fox News, media's outlets constantly tried to like discredit him, like I said before. But that's why there are those in the Black community who feel as if there will never be another Black president, like, because Barack Obama was such a once in a lifetime thing that, and like, due to our history in this country, it is damn near like impossible to see somebody like him again. You know what I mean? And that is why he's like, in my opinion, like such a great mentor and like a Superman. You know what I mean? But
I definitely agree. Sorry, Chris, carry on.
No, I was just gonna say, I mean, I agree with Chris. I think these really these racial issues are too entrenched in this country to be solved by a Black president. I think there was a decline in perceived racism at least during the presidency. Obviously, it's been shattered since. I mean, just looking at data, if you have the fact that the rate of police brutality has remained, it's not slowing down, it's remained the same, if not gone up, it really encapsulates that things aren't changing. And also, like Chris was touching upon, I mean, the issue is largely systemic. And we really have to dig ourselves out of this hole that we've dug. But it's a pretty deep hole, spanning back 400 years, if not more. And I feel like the rest of the country, we're belatedly acknowledging just how bad things are. But again, late is better than never. But I mean, it's going to take time. And it's not just about stop doing, I feel, what is wrong, but also undoing the harm that has been done systematically. And also, again, acknowledging our own implicit racist bias.
I definitely agree with both what Chris and Jakob have said, but speaking from a purely international stance, and then having come into America, I feel like Obama's election actually did more to expose the what would I call them? The problems with American society in terms of race, immigration, and religion, more so than it did to eliminate them. And I say this because I don't know if many of you remember, but during Obama's election, there was a lot of anti-racist, anti-immigration, anti-religion rhetoric going on surrounding him. And I definitely feel like his election didn't necessarily represent sort of an advancing of an anti-racist, post-racial movement or an anti-racist, post-racial America, but rather it sort of facilitated the counter-discourse that sort of downplays the persistence of structural and systemic racism in America, and it idealizes the idea of race relations being perfect. What I mean by this is that, say for example, like has been said by Chris and like has been said by Jakob, 8 years is not enough to undo 400 years, beyond 400 years of damage. And if we're going off the idea that Obama's election has suddenly eliminated racism, then one could say that Trump's election has empowered white supremacy and empowered racism. And we've gone way, way, way back. We took 1 step forward and 10 steps back. We could really say that about Trump's election. So, you know, I feel like it would almost be ignorant to assume, actually it wouldn't almost be ignorant, it would be ignorant to assume that his election would lead to some sort of post-racial America. Muted.
Sorry, I keep doing that. We got a question saying if we think that Obama's election was the beginning of the modern divide in American politics. I don't think that it was the beginning of the modern divide. I think, like Toby said, if anything, it just exposed a lot of problems that people felt like they didn't have the agency to speak about, because everyone thinks that, like, once again, the civil rights movement was somehow just supposed to fix everything. Like, we all know things on paper sound so good, but then when they're actually practiced, in actuality, when you try to implement them, it's a lot harder to force people to reconcile with the fact that they're going to have to give up certain liberties and certain freedoms that they've been afforded for the past 400 years just for the sake of allowing this specific group of people in the United States to be able to exist. And I also think that there was burnout after the civil rights movement. So for a lot of people, you know, they were just kind of like, I'm so tired. Like, I could almost guarantee, like, all the Black people that are listening to this right now feel really exhausted, even from this past week. Talk less of like the 20 years that we've been alive, talk less of the 400 years of, you know, racial tensions in the United States. It's really, really exhausting having to constantly think about your existence and constantly having to explain your humanity to someone. So it's not as if it just suddenly goes away. I think it comes in waves in terms of like, how much do I want to traumatize myself? How much do I want to exhaust myself even more to have the same conversations over and over again? I think what's different about this time around is the fact that people, like, all of our non-Black peers that are listening to all of this right now are here. Most of the time, I think in the past, people have just been like, of course, like, the civil rights movement happened, like MLK happened, like there's not any racism anymore. Like, oh, a bunch of Black immigrants could have played on the French national team, like racism is done. But we have people actively engaging and actively trying to listen and kind of placing, lifting a bit of that burden off of our shoulders, which is so crucial and so important, especially when 10, 20, 30 years down the line, we're all in positions of power, and we can, like, you guys can notice things that we've literally been noticing for eons, and take it upon yourselves to correct them before we have to, because prevention is always better than cure. I hope that answers that question.
Moreover, like, his election was merely a catalyst, in my opinion, to the change that's needed, because, as Abir said, it just, or like Toby, please excuse me, it only highlighted so much, like, you know what I mean, that's been going on. And as I told Kennedy the other day when I was FaceTiming her to like just check in, like I said that like going to all white school my entire life in New York City, like I believe like it's kind of hard to try to change people and like their mindset on things, because you already have your prejudice instilled in you whether you like it or not, because it's inherently, it's like it's an innate thing for humans to be prejudiced, you know what I mean, whether it's against like blacks, whether it's like, you know, just women, whatever, like you have your innate prejudice. And I learned throughout my experience of just like trying to share Black culture and my Black experience at like my high school, for instance, it's very difficult to just change somebody's mindset. You could, and like when you talk to a group of 1,000 people, you're only going to probably really only one person's going to resonate with what you said. And going back now to Obama's election, it's going to be like through everything that we're seeing now, from y'all being here, from like, because obviously you guys are here to learn more, you know what I mean? And like, just like to hear other people's experiences that are like your own, but it's our children where you're going to start seeing that divide, you know what I mean? Like where my Black daughters and my Black sons will be able to sit down in a room and hopefully not come back like crying. That's what Kennedy said. Like, you know what I mean? I completely, like, I felt that, man. I got chills because I was just like, damn, like, you're right. Because like, I don't want my kids to grow up and have this, like, go sit down in their rooms and think about like these little microaggressions, these little racial remarks, have somebody even get called them the N-word, you know what I mean? With the hard ER, you feel me? Like, you know what I mean? And it's just like, that's, in my opinion, where you're going to see the divide, because we're having these conversations now, you know what I mean? And growing up in a city or in like a major city and being in groups like Expat exposes you to a shit ton of people, yo, like a shit ton of experiences, you know? And like, while a lot of people do use this as like, you know, a social event, if you really just sit back like at parties and look at it all, you could see how we all are having the same shared experience of just learning so much from one another. And that is so important. And it's our duty to just continue that and show people that like, they're not different because of their skin color. They're not different because of their gender. Like, because like, and with that, like with our experiences, we then give it to our children, and then our children will give it to theirs. But it's just like, it's a matter of time. I don't think it's soon, but like the divide was catalyzed by Obama's election, but we're not really going to see the effects for like the next couple decades.
I want to just kind of follow up on that with a question, I guess, to all other panelists. So racial tensions right now are obviously high. That's no secret. And we are seeing a surge in right-wing populism. And I guess what I wanted to ask, do you think, the way I thought about this the other day is that what we're seeing right now could be described as kind of like the dying breath of old, white, largely Christian America kind of losing its grip on the power. And so that therefore, I mean, this surge that we're seeing is really trying to grasp at, you know, whatever they can as, you know, again, the dying breath. Do you think as we move on, do you think racial tensions will continue to escalate, or do you think, I'm talking, you know, generations, or do you think things are kind of like an all-time high right now?
I mean, I'm no soothsayer, but racism is not going away anytime soon. Like, it's not going to be gone, I don't think.
No, yeah, but
15, 20 years. I like, we could be peaking right now, but each generation has had its sort of peak. So I think it's too soon to tell, because there's new iterations of racial tensions within each generation and each cycle of people being born.
Yeah, I'm optimistic, but I really do think that this current movement is a representation of a shift. And that shift might not be necessarily to a post-racial society or to an anti-racist society, but I really do think that it's a shift into awareness. And I feel like a lot more people, like the fact that you guys are all here listening to this conversation shows that you care. So like, I really do feel like it's a shift of awareness and a shift of people recognizing the faults in their own societies and realizing that there's a time where like these issues aren't just things that we can push to the side. These issues are very clear and they're very much ingrained in each of our societies, and there's a lot that we can do to help it. And you know, not to sound all like Disney or whatever, but like I really do feel like if people work together to eliminate those faults from their societies and to really educate others on the faults in their societies, then really there can be a change. But I don't see it happening for like at least 200 years, if I'm perfectly honest.
Like also, we're just the beginning of it all. Like,
Yeah.
this is just the beginning of everything, right? Like, take these words, or like, you know, your opinions and everything like that, with the shared opinions, and just spread it. You know what I mean? Because like, this is a heated moment here in the U.S. Sadly, I do not know what's going on overseas, but obviously from everywhere else. But Toby tells me what's going on in Nigeria. You know what I mean? And like, just spread it. You know what I mean? Like, we need to make a change fully.
Yeah, and I think something that also would help that change is the sort of bringing it down into a university level, is thinking that, you know, everything that a Black person does is inherently political. And I think that's something that we all need to, Black people, non-Black people, need to think about, because when you look at a Black person in a predominantly white institution, what do you think about them? What does their presence mean to you? And sort of ask yourself those questions and deep dive into your own internalized and learned behaviors. Because like Chris was saying earlier, to your point, like I've been in predominantly white institutions since I was in kindergarten. And so there's certain things in which I enter a room, okay, I have to not raise my voice. My afro can't be that big. I can't take up too much space. And there's all these things that I've learned. And so if there's things that I've learned in order to distill myself and my identity in order for someone else to feel comfortable, that means that they've also learned that I'm supposed to be doing these things as well. So I think if we were able to combat that, and Abir said this earlier, with really consuming media and seeing Black people with more humanity, not only as the things that they're portrayed through in the media, as, you know, we're so commonly portrayed as drug dealers and as, you know, people who are constantly disenfranchised and constantly disassociating from themselves. And it's really, really important to consume media and to look at the Black people around you with humanity. And even though it sounds kind of basic, like, of course I look at everyone with basic humanity, really think about the certain levels of questions that you need to ask yourself in order to get to that point. And I wanted to sort of bring that down into a campus level, because I wanted to ask, how can we take these conversations, and for international students specifically, how can we take these conversations and take them into a country when maybe having these conversations isn't the norm and isn't as widely accepted? Is there something that we can, is there like something that we can institute within our own communities? Is there a way that we can start conversations? Because, you know, this Zoom call is a great space, but we're going to need to be able to do more work than that.
In terms, oh.
Go ahead.
I think in terms of bringing the conversations back to your countries, something really good is just picking up on the microaggressions, right? Whether it's in English or Portuguese or Spanish or Arabic or Hindi or Farsi or whatever you speak, bringing the microaggressions that transcend any language and tearing those down, and, you know, asking people what they mean by what they're saying. And if they say like, oh, it's just a joke, I'm just kidding, like, press a little bit more, because, you know, there's been times where people have said very egregious things to me that they just let hide behind the facade of it's just a joke. But those just a jokes are things that like were told to me when I was 12 years old, and I'm 21 now, and I still think about them constantly, and they affect my behavior, and they affect the way that I interact with people, and they affect whether or not I believe that I can occupy a space, and whether or not I believe that I deserve to be somewhere, which is a very exhausting thing to have to constantly be thinking about. So it just starts with like calling out your friends, like talking to your families, literally like sit here and ask yourself the question, if you brought like a Black guy or a Black girl home, like how would your parents react? And you know, it's not just enough to be like, oh, like they would love you, like of course they would like you, they like everyone. No, really think about it. Really think about the backhanded comments that they would say. Really think about whether or not your family would accept this person as a human being, or they would accept all of these preconceived notions and, you know, judge them based off of whatever stereotypes that especially American media has given them, or not.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I definitely would agree with that. I feel like in terms of that, we really just have to be like the change you want to see. Like you need to take these conversations into your own community. Social media is such a powerful tool. Videos translate in any language. Like that video of George Floyd, so many people all around the world have seen it, whether you speak English or not. Pain and distress and sadness and anger translates in any language. So it doesn't just take for being able to speak a particular language to want to see these changes. And I just feel like I said, be the change you want to see. Like we're all lucky enough to be able to travel to different countries. We're all lucky enough to be able to go to USC outside of whichever country we're from. And the purpose of doing that is so we can learn things in this country or in America and take it back home to our countries and change our countries the way we want to see them changing positively. And so I just feel like it's so important to, even talking to your friends, like help them understand that it's not just, like I said before, it's not just an American issue. Like the fact that I, for example, like when I want to go on holiday somewhere, I have to Google that if that place likes Black people or if that place is racist. Because the fact that I'm so conscious of whether I can go to a country depending on whether I'm going to experience a lot of racism there or not, means that it's something in those particular countries that people are conscious of. They're conscious of my Blackness. They're conscious of the rhetoric surrounding my Blackness. They're conscious of the connotations of being Black. So I just feel like once you take it down, it doesn't have to be to like a university level, take it down to an elementary level, whatever level it takes for people to understand, that's where we really just need to start the conversation.
I like to think of it as that, especially us as international students, we do have a dual responsibility in this, because we can bring our knowledge and our experience from having lived in other countries here to facilitate and to encourage conversation, but then also being able to carry the knowledge that you gain, the lessons learned, the insights that you gain back home to your own countries. And I notice there's a lot back home. There's just common misconception that racism is strictly an American issue. And granted, it is more entrenched here and extreme than maybe in other places, but it's still very much a global issue. I mean, the very concept of racism, it lacks geographical boundaries. You can't simply contain it and eradicate it. It's pervasive, and that's what makes it so complex. And even though the context is different, for example, when I go back to Sweden, the context is different. We don't have the same history, but I do see those same kind of patterns, stereotypes at play and prejudice. And those two hand in hand often lead to discrimination. And I feel, especially when you're going back home, it's really, you have to be aware of kind of like actively question the normal, the status quo. Look at it critically and question it. Examine how it grants certain groups of people privileges and how it deprives other groups of people that very same privilege. That makes sense.
Yep.
Perfect. So we're sort of coming into some of our final questions. And I see a lot of questions being asked about how to be an ally. And so specifically how to be an ally in the context of the international student. So this one question says, as international students, our visas are at risk when protesting. What are other ways we can actively and physically help during these times?
Okay, well, I think I'll start by saying that, yes, our visas are at risk as international students. However, I believe that, okay, so obviously if you get like arrested during a protest or something like that, then, there's a risk of deportation or our visas being taken away. But I do think that, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe our visa status and us as international, like non-residential aliens that were protected under First Amendment, I could be wrong though. That being said, when you go to, if you do decide to go to protests, when you go, don't take anything that shows your visa status. Don't take anything that shows your nationality. The other thing that you don't have to do, you don't have to disclose your visa status to anybody except say you get arrested. Say you get arrested, you don't have to disclose your visa status to anybody except an attorney. So you can definitely be active in those ways. And I'd say, like, if you do decide to go to protests again, try not to stay right at the front, like where all the action is happening. Stay like a little further back to the places where it just seems a little more calm, just in case everything goes left. And of course, like if you feel uncomfortable or if you're concerned, don't be afraid to just like go home. You don't want to risk your visa. That would suck.
Also, just like don't risk your visa at all. But like you could do informative posts, let your community know. Like I know for a fact, like all the people who need to hear my posts on social media, I don't follow anymore because I left Greek life, you know what I mean? But like as my white friends who are in Greek life message me like, how can I support? And I'm just like, yo, dude, it's super, as first an ally, hopefully, like, you know what I mean? It's very important for you to talk because you're reaching out to people who won't necessarily listen to me. You know what I mean? Because they look sheerly off the fact because you look like them and you share certain common traits. But on top of that, research fundraisers or stuff like that you could donate to. Every dollar counts. I donated like $20 thus far. You know what I mean? You don't need to post it because no one's gonna be like whoop-dee, like woohoo. You know what I mean? I gave $20, but like definitely just do your part through those two mere actions. You know what I mean? But just make sure that they're from credible sources and it's a shared opinion. Like because for instance, like I don't know how it got around, but the Blackout Tuesday thing happened and somebody or some group was just like tagged like Black Lives Matter on it, but it then washed out a ton of information with that like a lot of people wanted to see or like wish that they had. And it's just stuff like there was like just a lot. It was a game of telephone basically. But yeah, like just do your part by like, you know, just giving like $5, whatever you can, honestly, and just share informative posts to your viewers.
Also, if you speak another language, I know I keep going back to language, but language is so important, and the way that we communicate ideas is really, really important. So if you do speak another language, if you can like translate certain posts, the past few days I've been working on collecting a database of different sources that have been translated into a bunch of different languages in order to contextualize everything for people who aren't native English speakers or who aren't fluent in English. So if you have extra time on your hands and you can translate things that really resonated with you into your native language, I think that that's really important. That's probably the best way that you could help in order to not advocate for like Black Americans, but also the Black populations that are in your country or people who are of darker skin in your country.
I kind of felt a bit like a hypocrite in this. I'm still around LA, and I'm urging people to go out and, you know, make their voices heard. Yet I'm not, simply because I'm terrified of violating my visa status. I've heard horror stories from others who've been really close to getting arrested and all that. But obviously, I mean, with this movement, I really think that it really matters that the people who are not affected by this trauma is like that do something. I think it's contingent if you want that concrete change. But I mean, there are a number of ways how you can still be, you know, helpful from at home. Obviously, raise awareness on social media, but you can't really stop there. Something I felt like was really helpful is to go beyond social media and kind of have engaged in these conversations with older generations. I've been talking a lot with my parents, my grandparents back home about what's happening here, and just trying to shed some light on that. And then obviously educate yourself. There's, you know, whether that's through various media forums or books or articles, you know, signing petitions. Obviously, also making donations is super helpful. And I've also I realized that leveraging kind of your involvement in school organizations is great if you want to raise funds and really amplify the voices of those around you. So yeah, those are some things.
Wonderful. Okay, so we are approaching our last question, and we're bringing this down to a level of the expat community. How do you think that expat as a group may face anti-Blackness, or how expats can work together towards making the group even more open and more of a comfortable space? Abir, if you want to take this question, go ahead.
I would love to.
Okay.
Okay, so like in all seriousness, first of all, like usually when I talk to people about race, I usually keep it within either my Black friends or my like POC friends, because they kind of have adjacent experiences. In specific to expat, I kid you not, every single expat event that I've ever been to, we have like, there's only like 6 of us in expat or 7 Black people. And like, we've all talked about requesting Afro beats at an event every single time. Like, yes, that sounds really ridiculous, right? Whenever you think about it, like, it doesn't really matter if somebody like plays a song like from your culture, but when you hear like reggaeton being played, and then you hear EDM, and then you hear like obviously like popular like American music or whatever, at first it doesn't really seem that deep, but then when you think about, this is a community that's supposed to bring in a bunch of different people together, and this is a community where I am supposed to feel supported, and I'm supposed to feel like I can count on these people to pull up when stuff like this is going on. It makes you question the legitimacy of that community, and it makes you question the legitimacy of those connections and those intentions. Also, like, there's been Diwali and holy events, and it's like we've never really sat down and had a discussion on like what can we do to bring in like the experiences of our Nigerian or Zimbabwean or Caribbean members to expat events. You know, it seems as if there's been a shadow cast on the Black community besides like touting us for diversity clout. And I definitely think that that's an area that can be improved immensely, because I've made so many extraordinary friends, and I've met so many extraordinary people, and I've been able to share stories and experiences with these people. But it's like, how important is my story to you? If something as simple as, you know, like, why don't you ask me about what are holidays that I used to celebrate in Nigeria, or like what are my favorite, like what were my favorite like Nigerian songs, or what are super popular Nigerian songs that we could play at parties. Those end up kind of like exposing themselves in a situation like this, where you need the solidarity from your community, and you need the support from your community, and you need to know that your community is going to be the first people to go to war for you. You know, the same way that like if roles were reversed and something was going on in anybody else's country, like we should be able to show up for them, because it needs to go beyond the superficial, and it needs to go beyond us just kind of like, whatever, you know, like it matters. At least to me it matters, because I would definitely do it for any of you that are sitting here.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Abir. I feel like a lot of the time when people think of the term diversity, particularly in expats, we confuse it with just cultural and just a lot of people from different countries. And we kind of forget the racial aspect of diversity. Like I said, there are so many of us from so many different countries here, but looking at Expat LA, because that's all I can speak for, you know, like Abir said, there's only like what, 6, 7, if that, of us, and it just feels, if it's supposed to be a place where we feel at home, how at home can you really feel when there's no one that looks like you?
Facts. And like going to, even though I was not supposed to go to this event, it was right across, like right down the block from my house, but like the meet and greets, one of my dearest people, Nana, that's where I first saw him. And like outside of like all like the people that were there, I only saw basically like 2 Black faces, and I saw him as like a freshman, just like looking around, and like knowing damn well that there are not that many people who look like me in this club, especially for Expat LA. Again, we cannot speak on other branches of expat, but it could be hard to like, you know, like feel as if you belong in a place, because you go to all white institution, and then on top of that, like a lot of the clubs are predominantly white, and you just need somebody there to like, you know, say it's all right, you know what I mean, it's gonna be okay. And while like, and you know, like that's how I met Nana, that's how I met Toby, Abir, and everyone else basically. And going back to the music thing, like while y'all see me vibing to like everything, because I do vibe to most things, it's just like hearing like Afro beats, more like as like an American who grew up in New York City, especially from Brooklyn, like throwing up more hip hop, like not with like just a hip hop like electronic remix where like, you know, you start spazzing out, but like, you know, just like it's supposed to be an inclusive, excuse me, club. And like when it comes to the parties, not everyone is like, you know, enjoying their time or just vibing out at these events. While like, you know, you do meet a lot of great people, and I'm not going to discredit Expat for like not introducing me to like everyone like that I just like hold dearly to today. But just like at certain events, like Abir said, it's just like to get everyone going, you need to play music for everyone. You know what I mean?
And then also just kind of extending beyond parties, because like parties are not the end all be all, but like what are we doing to facilitate conversations between our members from all of these different places, and really like going deep on like what is something from your culture that you really want me to know? Like what can I truly learn about who you are and where you come from and your life experiences? That's definitely a question to consider, because you know, like it's not just enough to like hear a song at a party, or it's not just enough to be able to occupy this space. Like it's really about forging those connections, not by force, but forging those connections and making them authentic and making them real. Yeah.
Host expat events like on Thursdays, like as a senior, going to like she's in the chat, but Cat's house, like that's right across from mine. It's just like I met so many new people, and like with that, you know, you just like you get to understand the individuals on a personal level, things that you won't see outside, like see at the party setting. Moreover, just try to make different foods from different places. You know what I mean? Priya and I, we went on like a Japanese night, literally the night before most people left. It was like the very last expat event of my senior year. And it was like by far one of the best because so many people pulled up. We all had deep conversations, played like different games. But like expat is not only like a social club, it's also a family, you know what I mean? And have these conversations with one another that will, so you could really get to know people, so that when you see them at a party, you're like, oh, that's my homie, you know what I mean? But like it's all about that. Like, you know, don't be scared to meet other people, go on a voyage trip with those you don't know, because you never know what you want to get out of it, you know what I mean?
And that story is going to carry with you, most importantly. So it's like when the Black Lives Matter stuff is happening right now, you literally have 7 faces to think of, at least like for the expat LA thing. Like those are your 7 like brothers and sisters that you care about so much. Like there's literally only 7 of us, like you barely can, right here, right? So it's like you have, even if you say like, oh, I don't really have any Black friends, or I don't really know any Black people, like that's really not true, because you've occupied all of these different spaces with these people. And those are the people that you should be thinking of. And then you should extend that to like, oh my God, their families, or oh my God, like the people that look like them in general. Like this matters to so many people. And just like start with the stories that are exposed, like that are introduced to you first. That's the best way to lead into all of this. Yeah.
And I just furthermore, I feel that there is a stereotype about us, about this organization, as being all about rich foreigners and this kind of like Soho House-like members club, which it's really not. And I think we all really value the diversity in this community, but we can definitely do more to show that appreciation, really push for that inclusivity. And you know, that goes beyond speech. Just speech alone is being passive. It's not good enough. And again, just to emphasize, this is not responsibility of our Black members to either educate the rest of us or push us into action. And again, I think it's not by just stop doing what's bad. We have to undo what's bad. And I guess that, you know, includes providing a platform for all our members, and especially our Black members. And whether that's shown through the music that we play, the type of events that we put on, the themes that we have for those, or just like the overall activities.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much. And with that, we're going to end our discussion. A couple of things to note before you guys log off. We just want to let you guys know, so for all of you who RSVP'd through the Expat app, there is a place underneath it where you can chat and continue this conversation beyond this Zoom call if you're interested. As well as one final note is just to remember that the Black community right now in America, internationally, is grieving. We're all experiencing different levels of grief and different levels of confronting emotions. So please be kind and please be intentional with your language and with asking questions. I think asking questions is an incredible way to relate to someone, and we were all so privileged to be able to sit here and talk to all of you, but you have to remember that, you know, you can't use the Black community necessarily to teach you everything, especially now. We're not necessarily in a place for that. And although I loved being here, it takes an emotional toll. So just please remember, when, you know, you think about texting your Black friend, what do you think about allyship? And even though that question is completely valid, just really take in the moment and think about what's happening politically and socially right now. Grief is a huge thing, and we just want to be able to respect everyone. We are going to end our session. I am so thankful for everyone who is here. Continue to do great work in your communities. Please hit all of us up to offer support and continue to support the Black Lives Matter movement in your own lives on social media. Thank you guys so much. We miss you. Please stay safe if you are protesting and just in general against COVID. We love you guys. Thank you, our expat family. We'll see you soon.
All love, y'all, with love.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.